Sturmland, a powerful city-state, but here in this land of gladiators and fighting pits, you'll find the most ferocious warriors. Remorseless fighters, heartless soldiers. How about I tell you a tale about a warrior shrouded in darkness, with only one light to guide her way. A story of a mother fighting to get back to her children in a land of ruthless cutthroats and ferocious monsters. Travelers, merchants, mercenaries, my fellow men and women, gather around the fire. Refill your ales, light your pipes, for our story begins with a loving mother, Katerina, working on a farm on the edges of the kingdom of Arcadia after her husband's passing. She struggled to make ends meet to take care of her son and her daughter. The local farmers pitied her, a woman on her own, in charge of a failing farm. But Katerina was far from pitiful. She was strong-willed and more physically capable than most of the men in the farmlands. The women envied her beauty, even as a farmer's wife. Her flowing red hair soft as silk. She was physically intimidating, with the form of a warrior. This came not just from years of physical labor on the farm, but from her father. See, Katerina was the daughter of a knight of Arcadia, retired due to injuries sustained in battle. He had only his family to take care of. She was the only child his wife had birthed, and by gods he would make sure that she could take care of herself. So, he taught her how to fight, how to ride horses and to care for them. She learned to survive in the wilderness with just her wits and maybe a small blade. Growing up a warrior's daughter, she had become quite the troublemaker, constantly getting into fights and winning them. When she had met the kind-hearted man known as Citric that would become her husband, the world changed. She sought not glory, but to protect the family she now loved. Starting a farm together, they knew hardship, but also love. Unfortunately, Citric fell to illness like many during the decade of pestilence. The plague had struck in Arcadia. Now a widower, she still had a family to protect and take care of. Her son, Aster, and daughter, Hilda. They were what was most important. Then, tragedy struck once more. Raiders invaded the outskirts of Arcadia, burning and destroying as they ravaged the outer lands. Katerina took up what was once her father's sword. She'd give her life to protect her children if she had to. Slaying raider after raider, the land she loved ran red with blood. But there were too many. They took her down and chained her up, but they did not sell her to the pleasure houses like they did with most captured women. No. The raiding leaders saw how well she fought. They had never seen a woman quite like her before. So she was sold to the gladiator pits in Sturmland, in secrecy. Now rich men, they decided to sell her children to a working camp in northern Rhineland. Katerina swore she'd get revenge on the men who took her children, and she would reunite with them. But in the gladiator pits, winners are rewarded. She'd win enough fights for her freedom if it took every ounce of strength left in her. And then she'd fight even more. Arriving in the Pearl Arena, inlaid with red stones, she found herself in Blickwell. Now a gladiator in the grandest stadium in Arcadia, the Crimson Coliseum. Being the only woman there, the men eyed her with confusion and bloodlust. But she did not tolerate such disrespect. She broke the arm and several ribs of the first man who attempted to touch her, sending him to the ground with a series of blows. And from that moment on, no man laid his hand upon her. She fought fight after fight, wielding the largest sword in the armory she could find. Few men in Blickwell stood a chance against her. Katerina was fierce, experienced beyond her years, and most of all, powered by conviction to reunite with her children. There are few forces to rival the might of a mother's love, my dear listeners. Even the gods have come to fear it many times before. Katerina won fights, and she kept winning. Fighting men across the southern mountains and the eastern rivers, she had become the champion of the Crimson Coliseum. Loved by both the people of Blickwell and her fellow gladiators, they called her the Crimson Queen. Her hair crimson red, and the Coliseum she rose to own. Gifted with her own quarters, she had a comfortable bed and food to fill her belly, but at the cost of her freedom. No matter how many fights she won, her freedom was bestowed not. The Crimson Queen had become a symbol in Sturmland, far too valuable to just let go. Waiting for her next fight, she sat with her companions, greatsword in hand. "We're starting to think you're undefeatable, Crimson Queen." The men laughed and cheered. They looked up to her. "Maybe here, but there is one fight I still cannot win, one prize I cannot attain." The men who knew her well knew of what she spoke. Aster and Hilda. They filled her dreams as her late husband haunted her steps. "I'm sorry, my love. I know not if I can free our children, but I will keep trying, no matter what," she whispered to herself. These days, she often spoke to her husband, hoping he could hear her from the heavens. She was so far away from all that was dear to her. The battle masters of the Colosseum brought men of the islands of the east, from scorched isles and charred shores, to fight her. 5 armored men against 1 woman. But she was a champion after all. Dodging spear after spear, she deflected another before bringing one man down with a single sword stroke. Breaking the shield of another, red hair flowing behind her, she struck him down. Twirling through the air, she shattered spears, cracked armor, all with only sustaining a few scratches. This was until her final challenger approached. A man armor-clad, bearing a hammer as large as she was. He shook the earth with each stroke, breaking her cherished blade in the process. Forced to pick up a half-broken shield and one of her enemy's rapiers, she looked her enemy in the eyes. While his were filled with anger and bloodlust, only conviction lay within her own. Thrown to the side, her shield was utterly destroyed. Left with few choices, she drove her sword into his leg, pulling a dagger from her belt, and she drove it in the weakest point in his armor, right under the arm. Piercing his heart, she felt another man. While her body was beaten and bruised from this formidable foe, she still stood. As the crowd cheered and shouted, she felt the Colosseum shake. Walking back to the waiting area, she felt it. The heat. The stadium shook and began to collapse in places, as all she saw were flames. Was the city under siege? It was a common tactic to send balls of flame into cities during a siege. Nevertheless, she had to escape, lest she be burned alive in her own prison. During the commotion, one of the gates was battered, bolts loosened. Grabbing one of the swords from the armory, she began to pry the door open. The guards were too focused on running for their own lives. They had left the gladiators and locked the doors behind them. Bastards. But with the help of a few of the other men, they broke the bolt on the east gate. Stampeding out of the halls of the Colosseum, they were free. During the commotion of destruction and flame, they escaped into the city. Katerina ran, sword in hand, and never looked back. "Thank the gods," she said. This was her chance to find her children. She fled, as fast as her legs could carry her, until she hit the tree line. Here in the woods, among the commotion, the guards would never find her. For days she walked, foraging and hunting for food when she could. She only knew her children had been sold somewhere in Vineland. It could take months or years to find them, but find them she would. The fires of Blickwell lit the mountainside and Sturmland ablaze. Smoke rose to the heavens. What hell raged there she did not know. Her mind was focused on one thing, moving forward to her children. At night she lay looking up at the stars. "I wish you were here to help me," she said to the skies. But she knew that this was her fight alone now. Even if the world had forsaken her, enough strength remained in her to push on. Traveling along the god's shield, she climbed the southern mountain range with purpose. Her mind dwelled on the fate of her loved ones, but she could not afford to fixate on the possibilities. Faith kept her feet moving. As she arrived at the base of the shield, she was now in Vineland. Her feet covered in blisters, she found refuge in a small town at the bottom. Eyes lingered on her tattered armor and cloth. Finding a local blacksmith, she was able to make some coin from her armor. She had fought for years to be awarded such high-quality steel, but she did not hesitate to part with it, not if it meant a step towards her goal. The sword, however, she could not afford to part with. A time would soon come when she would be required to use it. Getting a room in the inn and a mug of ale for the first time in what seemed like forever, she was restless that night. Her mind wandered to flames and ruin, men she had fought with in the pits who may not have made it out alive, the fate of her offspring. Finally drifting into sleep, she dreamed of home, of the fields she once worked, of her beloved, the horses she grew up riding. Katerina awoke in a damp room, on a poorly constructed bed. Nevertheless, it was the first bed she slept on as a free woman in quite some time. Grabbing her blade, she made off, and from town to town she went in search of her beautiful red-haired children. They would not be hard to find with those thick red locks. Even so, she had an entire city-state to traverse, and that was assuming they had not been moved over time or been sold elsewhere. She had gained a reputation, the Crimson Queen. Vineland was plagued with bandits, and mercenaries even more so than Sturmland. At least there, the people were warriors who could fight them off. Here, the people were scared, content with the shadows they'd been shrouded in for so long. Slowly but surely, she'd be known as a hero, fighting criminals and bandits not only for revenge, but out of a sense of justice. So many had been wronged like her before. She'd make sure the people of Adelgis remembered what it was like to live in peace. Arcadia was her home, but this was a kingdom of men and women too, was it not? She'd take out the darkness at the root, long before she'd think of turning her eyes to Arcadia once more. But did she ever find her children? That's another tale for another night. So I'll leave you with this. The Crimson Queen arrived in Fjörhelm, the capital of the Darkened State. Thuric Rorkson's sins still stained this place. While it was a powerful city that appeared well kept, the darkness inside could not be quelled so easily. For months she had wandered, not a word of Oster or Hilda. But here she found an encampment of men with all too familiar armor and cloth. These were men of the same group who had sold her and her children. She waited until the dead of night to attack. Now fixed with new armor and a cloak over her back, she wielded the sword from the fighting pits she had yet to part with. And with the swiftness of a banshee on the night's wind, Katerina rampaged through the camp, taking several men on at a time. Her blade pierced their armor and shattered their axes. Much blood was spilled that night, but it was not all crimson and shadow. There were women and children in the camp, locked in cages. It broke her heart to see them nearly starved and chained. Freeing those she found, they were given what supplies and weapons she could spare to return to their lives or maybe start a new one. After all, there was now an entire camp's worth at their disposal. Katerina only took with her one thing. On the body of the final man she had slain was her father's sword, the one she'd taken up in arms against them these few years ago. "Never thought I'd see this again," she whispered. Picking it up, she now held two blades to remind her of where she had come, the strength she held. Coughing up blood, the man stuttered out some words at her. "You'll regret this. We are Legion. Those who still honor the Shadow String Pact remain. You can never snuff us out, so-called Red Queen." "It's Crimson," she corrected. "What?" he responded, coughing up more blood. "It's the Crimson Queen, and you shall utter that name when the ferryman takes you across the River of Souls into the flames of hell. All men like you will," she exclaimed as the man was dispatched into oblivion. She was a hero to those she had saved. Ensuring they at least made it into the city, they praised her for her help. But she did not feel like a hero. Katerina was a warrior, someone who'd fought for what she believed in, like her father before her. She was a woman who knew pain and just wanted her children back. Staying in Fjörland for the night, she drank away her sorrows. No matter how many she saved, the void in her heart would not fill. Those in the city who still cared praised her as well, even buying her drinks. They did not dare lay a hand on her, though. A man approached her at the bar, armor-clad and furrowed brow. He was one of the city guard. He had once worked in a smaller town in Vineland before his promotion. There he recalled seeing two strikingly red-haired children sold to strange men with armor from the north. Armor with the symbol of a moon carved into the plates. It was not a location, but it was the first clue she'd been given. Thank the gods. She had a purpose, somewhere to look. She'd find them, no matter what it took. The Crimson Queen in Adelgis turned her eyes to the north. She left Vineland better than she had found it, and for that, she'd be remembered. That is the end of our tale for now, but the Crimson Queen remains, in search of those she loves, fighting across Arcadia until she finds them. Hey guys, thanks again for listening in. Check out our other series, History of Arcadia, and our previous episodes of Tales of Arcadia. Find us on Facebook at Poems and Embers to see updates on the script and official art. Also find the link to my book, Wings of Heaven, down below. Please like, comment, subscribe, you know what to do, and come back again next week for another tale of Arcadia. Thanks again.